Shear. I'm a professional occupational therapist. You might know me from my website beahappymom.com and my online store Creations from Jerusalem. In this video I want to answer a private message that was sent to me, which is the same as a questions emailed to me, comments on Facebook. It's a criticism, it's a question, and I'd like to address it. That question is, why do I not concentrate on one thing? The truth is I am. It's just that unfortunately you don't understand what it is that I'm doing. So I'd like to first remind you that the one thing that I'm concentrating on is an occupational therapy center. In order to understand what that means, you'll have to join me to come and have a look at the world of an OT. Let's have a look at the world of the OT. Well, if you have a look at this image over here, you're going to notice a world in the hand of somebody. It's a little bit difficult to invite you into a department room of an occupational therapist, because that department room is going to vary depending on where the OT is working and what aspect of function is required. Let me explain a little bit. Firstly, a couple of areas where you might find an occupational therapist working, and these go back in my 27 years of working to the first kinds of facilities. You might find an occupational therapist in a hospital, in a school, in a preschool, in an old aged home, and in an insurance company, of all places. Now, let's think a little bit more. An occupational therapist might be involved in helping a person to get up out of bed, so you might find her at the bedside, you might find them in the kitchen, you might find them in the playground, you might find them, if an occupational therapist is specialized in hippotherapy, you might find them on a farm with horses. So the world of the occupational therapist really is the world in many ways. We're involved in all kinds of occupations and activities, and that's the medium of our therapy. So let's take another look now at the bottom of that globe. And if you notice, the continent that was featured on the globe was Africa. And at the bottom of that is South Africa. That's where I trained. So if you look at the next image that comes up, that's the University of Cape Town. That's the university where I trained to become an occupational therapist. And a little bit around the mountainside is a hospital called Shoshanah, where the medical faculty, as it was called in those days, was situated as well. It's now the medical sciences or the health sciences faculty. And in that hospital is where I started working. The significance of that is I would like to welcome you into my first year of working. Come and join me. And here in my first year of working, you'll find me in Neurosurgery is one department I was asked to cover, Ophthalmology, and I was the first occupational therapist assigned to maternity. Now, I did not do either of those independently. I was covering all three areas at the same time, simultaneously. My day was divided into 8-hour slots, maternity being a new area. They were not sure how many of the women coming into maternity would be requiring occupational therapy services, and so that was left open. Whenever a referral came through, I had to fit her in to whatever my schedule was at the time. So let's have a look at neurosurgery for a brief couple of seconds or minutes. And in neurosurgery, I was covering the ICU, neurosurgery ICU that is, the main ward, the overflow ward, and the outpatients. And because we had a very special head of department, a forerunner in neurosurgery in many, many ways, he had the belief that occupational therapy started even when the patient arrived at the hospital. That meant that quite often I went into the emergency unit or the trauma ward. So as an occupational therapist working in neurosurgery, I was covering acute care, inpatient physical rehabilitation, and that was specific to neurorehabilitation, and outpatient rehabilitation. Now in the ICU, I became quite skilled in an area of occupational therapy called coma stimulation. Although that might be a little bit controversial, I had some amazing, incredible results. For example, one person who the doctors predicted that if she survived for the first 48 hours, she'd be a vegetable for life. Well, thanks to occupational therapy intervention, she not only came out of her coma, she went home and she managed to complete her schooling. That's quite an amazing achievement. And because there's so much controversy around this specialized field of coma stimulation, that is the topic of one of my books. Now, my books I started writing as a marketing tool, partly by the request of the parents of 2 children that I was working with at the time, who said to me that occupational therapy is so misunderstood that their children had not been referred, even though their children had required occupational therapy really from babyhood. They had not been referred until they were already 4 and 6 years old. So that's where my book about occupational therapy came to be written, and in order to market my books is how I started doing these videos. So that's opened the door for some other areas. Now let's go back into my first year of occupational therapy for a little bit, and I'd like to introduce you to some of what I was doing with the ophthalmology patients. Now, ophthalmology is to do with the eyes. It's a completely different area of occupational therapy to neurosurgery or neurorehab. The majority of my patients were adults, and you might say, well, why don't I stick to adults? Well, now I had a child come onto the ward, and all of the other OTs who were working in this hospital with predominantly adults were training and specializing in that area of human development. But I had a child come in, so I had to work with a child. So now this particular child was blind, and he had a number of physical disabilities as well. The doctors thought he might be only trainable in terms of what education level he could reach and his level of function, until he came into occupational therapy. Now, because I happened to be multi-talented, I started to sing with him, and I introduced him also to the world of music. Music is something that I used with some other blind people also, and with another blind child that I worked with. I had this drum custom made specifically to the height that was required, so that this child would be standing and the drum would help him. While drumming with me, he was improving his standing tolerance. Some other things that I was doing, if we go into my area of educational toys and games and art that I love to use, we needed to occupy this child and introduce him to play. And in our occupational therapy department, we didn't have sufficient games and toys available for children who were blind, and we didn't have a budget to be purchasing them. So what did I do? I made them. What I started doing is something that this particular set I made when I was now working in private practice, and that is a version of a memory game. You can see a texture on this wooden piece, a different texture on there. Here's another texture, and I even have a coin. It's probably a South African coin since it was made in South Africa. They're duplicates of these because it's a memory game, and the children have to feel each texture and then try to remember what the texture is in finding a card of the same kind of texture. Another game that I made was dominoes for the child. And dominoes for children usually is visual. It either has a picture, or it has a color, or it has dots, as you'll see coming into the image. Now, for this child, since he was completely blind, having a picture wouldn't help terribly much. Our next was tactile. So I got together with my woodwork technician and a patient who was in back rehab, another aspect of the neurosurgery that I was doing. Yes, neurosurgery is not only head injuries, it also has a lot to do with those who come in for back surgery. So this particular patient was needing to improve his standing tolerance, and to help him with that, I have had him join me in making a set of dominoes. Some of the set of dominoes I did myself, some aspects my woodwork technician made, and the balance this patient was making. So although the child at the end of the end stage of this set of dominoes. The child was the one who enjoyed playing with dominoes and learning how to feel the different textures that we put onto the wooden pieces. But it provided an activity that I used with an adult while he was improving his endurance and standing. So as you can see, when you become an occupational therapist, you're not focusing on one talent. An occupational therapist needs to be able to blend into, when are we going to use woodwork, weaving, singing, dancing, horse riding. Activities are endless because life is endless, and how we as human beings are engaging in the world and being able to function is pretty large. So another example, I mentioned that in neurosurgery that we might work with head injured patients. A lot of those came from motor vehicle accidents. Some neurosurgery would also be people who've had a stroke. Now, somebody could have a stroke, let's say when they're in their 30s, in their 40s, when they're in their 60s, and each of those ages is a different stage of the human life cycle. That means that if it's a woman, let's say I'm focusing on a woman who's had a stroke. If the woman is 30 and she's had a stroke because her blood pressure went up during childbirth, then she would be dealing with a newborn baby, and the newborn baby has to come into the treatment plan. Somebody who's in her 40s might have a child who's perhaps a teenager and going to school, or maybe she's already becoming a grandmother. Someone in her 60s would have grandchildren, probably, if she's managed to get married young and have children and grandchildren, and might be even going on to great-grandchildren. Each of these different additions to the family means that we as occupational therapists need to keep the family, the role of the woman in context of the family in mind at all times in deciding whether we're doing with one stroke patient. The baking session that I did with her was in order that she could maintain being able to provide home-baked goods for her family, because that's what was important for her as the grandmother in that particular family. So yes, I do use many different activities. I do use all of my talents and skills, and as you can hear, each of those is important for all of the clients that I'm working with, because a human being doesn't do one thing. If I'm working with a patient, the child for example, and I'm going to say, well, my goal is to help this child to be able to be at a level of function that he can go to school. Now, if that requires music to help him to be able to speak so that he can communicate and listen and learn in the classroom, plus it requires that he can have concentration and he can have sufficient sensory, his tactile ability to touch and understand and remember what it is that he's feeling is of a level that he's starting to be able to learn Braille, and he can hear and concentrate and learn in the classroom, I could say that I'm going to refer him to somebody who's involved in music, and I'm going to refer him to the woodwork room, and I'm going to refer him to somebody who does the art and makes a mobile. I made a mobile for him which was completely the type that was tactile and sound instead of visual. Now you can ask, how was that? And that is going to extend my video, so if you bear with me, I'll be happy to describe it in a different video. What the point is that as an occupational therapist, I was able to help that child from the point that I began with him, that he was completely contracted in the fetal position, unable to speak, unable to do anything for himself, to get him to the stage that he was speaking in 3 languages and he was ready to go to school. That's a phenomenal outcome. And really, occupational therapy is a work of art in many ways, and building the center that's been my dream for 30 years now is a work of art. So for anybody who's asking me, why don't you stick to one thing? I'm developing an occupational therapy center. And along the way, there's some marketing that's required, which means writing my books, and it means producing these videos. It means educating a little bit more about occupational therapy, and for that I'm bringing in some tips and demonstration videos to help you understand what occupational therapy is about. And I'm also involved in developing a website. The starting starting point of that was from being the first occupational therapist involved in maternity, and that's my website, Be a Happy Mom. If you have a look at my online store, you'll see, yes, I do have a number of different products that I'm making. It's not just painting on canvas. There are other products, I do admit that. And here I ask you again, please bear with me. I ask you to please take a look at 2 websites. One of them is Fun and Function, and Fun and Function was started by an occupational therapist. Her products are all in the education range. They're all to do with children. It's fun for children. It improves their function. Because she's trained in sensory integration, a lot of the products that she's developing have to do with sensory integration. My background is a little bit different, so my products are a little bit different. Another website is TheraPro, and if you have a look on the blog of TheraPro, you're going to find 3 of my articles. Now that fits into my freelance writing service, and one of the ideas behind this freelance writing service is that, number one, I can share my experience and expertise from having been a therapist for 27 years now, and in addition to that, these articles and the writing of these articles, ghostwriting, ebooks and so on, this is all part of helping me to earn what I need to develop the center. The products that I'm making, although it's not only one type of product, it's products that are going to become or are becoming product lines. And the thought behind that is that I can be able to do job creation. My niche area and what's very close to my heart is to empower widows and orphans. So that's why I need my center. That's why I need my sales to be of a level that the store and the development of the products can be self-sufficient. And instead of my having to ask you to please assist me with the startup funding to purchase another piece of equipment or another evaluation or for starting to make another toy, that the sales will help to generate that income, and it will get to a stage that instead of it being a one-man show, that it's a full center that really is doing what my goal and vision is, which is to empower widows and orphans. So if you're wondering why am I doing so many things, an occupational therapist does a lot of things. I'm sorry, that's what we are. If you have a look at my blog or my website and you find the video that I did about combining occupational therapy and art, you'll see that I mentioned there that occupational therapists are masters of activity. We are masters of how to analyze activities and the environment in order to enable our patients or our clients to function to optimum. So please stay with me. If you're interested in what I'm doing, if you have a question, if something's bothering you or you would like to purchase something, or you would like another demonstration video, please be in touch. Put a question or a comment in the notes below, in the comments below. Send me a message. I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'll be happy to do a video if I can, a blog post, or it might become content of a book, one of the many books that I'm writing. So thank you for your questions, and I hope that this video helps to clear up the question of why am I not concentrating on one thing. Well, as I said, I am. I'm developing a full center, which really is a work of art on its own. And so thank you for watching and for being a part of what I'm doing. Do join me on my Patreon, subscribe to my channel and become a part of what I'm doing. And thank you so much for watching.